Okay, Kevin McGrail, the shield.
All right, well, good morning, or afternoon even, sorry. So I won't cover every point because there's been a lot of duplication, but one of the things I like to talk about is inclusion, meritocracy, and the Apache Way, and I'd like to talk about the real positives of it and how you can use it for your advantage to really improve your communities and improve the people that you bring into those communities. So a little bit about me, not too much. I work on the Apache Spam Assassin project. I've been involved there for a long time. I've served as a VP of fundraising and executive officer of the treasurer role at Apache as well. And today we're going to kind of talk about, what is the ASF, what is the Apache Way, and about our inclusion and how that works. And we'll cover these major topics. So, and I do apologize. I'm going to talk like a very, very fast person from New York, I think. So. One of the things about me that I try and make sure with my inclusion, I work on a lot of medical stuff. I sit on a board for an organization. I have this disorder. You don't probably know what it is. There's only 39 people in the world, including me, that have it. But because of that, I do try and think about what people are going through, what struggles they have, and what makes their life difficult in working on open source software. So, all right, what is the ASF? Hopefully most of the people know what it is here, but we're a charity. We're a 501c3 in the US, and we're not a trade organization. And we're really started out, our grandfather project was the HTTP server, and of course the Apache software license. Most people kind of think synonymously with Apache and those two items. But our mission is to provide software for the public good. We basically do that by providing the structure and the legal foundation for projects to come in and be able to produce their software. And we do a lot of them, and we produce this software at no charge. It's very, very important what we do. I won't talk too much about the license, but it's very permissive, very business friendly, and it's one of the reasons I started supporting the ASF so early on. This is a great slide if you want to talk to people about the Apache Software Foundation. You want to convince them to come into your community. You want to bring some diversity. If they've never heard of the Apache Software Foundation, these are 3 bullet points I like to bring up. That 80% of the world's websites use some portion of our software. Every smartphone in the world has our software on it, and every plane in U.S. airspace is tracked with our software. Those are pretty big things, but you talk to a lot of people that don't know who we are. We're so intrinsic in how things work that people don't know who we are. So you want to get people excited. Those are the kind of statistics that you can tell them. I also really like these 2 websites, projects.apache.org and apache.org/logos. The latter one has every logo for all of our top-level projects. I think we've almost got to all but about 2 dozen of the incubating projects as well. So it looks really, really good. And on there, you can see all the projects we have. So we're at 382 open source projects or initiatives up there, 202 committees, 332 projects, and I think over 50 exactly, incubating projects. So those are the new projects that may or may not make it to a top level project. But that's a lot of initiatives, a lot of things to keep track of. I won't get into all of them, but there's a lot. We go from A to Z, Xerxes even, but we even have Apache Zookeeper. So we really do have A to Z. But I do have a quiz, and I know, at least Rich, you're not allowed to answer this question. So who here knows why the Duke is called the Duke? You want to go ahead and shout it out?
Yeah, Doug Cutting had a kid who had a little stuffed animal.
Yep, exactly. So that little yellow elephant was one of his kids, I think his son, younger son's stuffed animal named Duke. This is how engineers name things. Usually it's some sort of silly thing like a stuffed animal, or it's a reference to some pop culture movie, or some play on an acronym. So, these kind of things, they're playful. They show that there's people behind these things. So I do recommend you think about where do these things come from. Additionally, one of the ones that I like telling people about, again, engineers love double entendres, double meanings, and really more so. Big data. The term big data, most people assume it has to do with the size of the data. It sort of does, but that's not really. It had to do with the fact that Doug was talking about elephants, and elephants live in a circus, and circuses are big top. So that's kind of where Big Top got its name, to help manage Hadoop installations and whatnot. So You know, a lot of reasons this stuff exists. And I think the previous speakers were dead on. You know, this tribal knowledge is something I try and bring up because they're neat stories. They talk about why these things exist, and they a lot of times can give you insight into why things work. Because we're over 20 years old now, we're getting to be pretty gray hairs up here and whatnot. People being involved, and we want the next generation to pick it up and take it to where they want to go. Okay, so this is a really important thing about the ASF because I don't really believe we have to be 100% inclusive because at our core, we're not a democracy, we're not capitalists, we're not a monarchy, we're a meritocracy. And what that means is you have to be able to kind of back up what you say by doing it and earn merit. And you can earn merit in a lot of different ways, and that's something I'm very big on at the ASF. Documentation, graphics, bug grooming, answering questions on user lists, sending emails, things like that, putting on road shows. These are ways you can earn merit that aren't just coding. Sometimes you get people that are a little too coding. It's the only way you can earn merit, but that's not correct. But the point is that meritocracy is really a key part, but it's the good parts about meritocracy. If you read about meritocracy, people will talk about the fact that that's a really bad form. Throw out the bad stuff, we only base on the good stuff. You know, I've talked a little bit about why we exist and what we provide. We provide the resources, we provide the legal protection, recognition, so a lot of marketing and stuff like that to help people understand what's going on, grow your communities. A big phrase we make a lot, you'll see stickers out front, communities over code. Very important, build a community. Software has a lifetime. It will go away, that's a natural part of what happens. When it does, we hope the community survives and looks at what the next software that's needed and starts working on it. So communities are more important to us than anything else. All right, quiz break. This one might be more for the, so before emojis, we had a thing where we wrote ASCII text usually to spell things or say things. So anybody know what these were called? Oh dear God, I feel old now. Even rich?
Not sure.
They're called emoticons.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Is that an emoticon?
That is an emoticon. Do any of you young people, I guess, know what that one stands for? That's Starbucks.
Oh.
This one right here is a doctor. Little stethoscope. This one right here, anybody? Okay. This one right here? Same cat after it got hit by a car. So. Then we have some other ones. I like the top one. I read that one. That was a guy in a tie. The next one's roses, and then you have hearts. So yes, back in the day, that was what we spent lots of time with our keyboards doing. All right. Anyway, okay. So on to the Apache Way. So the Apache Way is very resilient. And I like to make 2 points, and sometimes people don't like my first point, which is that a lot of people hate the Apache Way for a few years. But the reason I mention that is I want people to know that they might hate it, because sometimes it feels like it's undefined. It feels like it is hampering what you're doing. But then usually about 2 years in, something comes up and they see the light. And that's all I generally can tell people sometimes, is that stick with it. There'll be a reason that you'll like it and you'll go, aha. And one of the big reasons I like it is because it's not necessarily tribal knowledge. There's a lot of us who do talks about it, but there is no one Apache way. So Daniel Ruggieri, he actually coined the term yet another the Apache Way presentation. So that's kind of what this is, yet another one of these. And everybody has their little take on it. We have a lot of elements that overlap. Danny Angus wrote this book, and basically what he said is, one of the reasons he likes it is because it's resilient and it's self-corrected. Over 20 years ago now, when we started doing this, open source didn't even have a name. It was only named in February of 1999. I was actually looking up this morning to see who named it. One of the guys on our founding board was at the meeting where they got formed. But the point being is, it's not like anybody gave us a book on how to do it or a roadmap or how to make this happen. So we had to make it up as we went along, and that sounds a little informal, but we had to basically correct as we went along and figure out what charts the path. And I think right now we're in a similar situation where diversity and inclusion and meritocracy needs to be charted for what's going to be the successful way for the next 20 years. So, but we are a charity, and that is probably one of the biggest points. We're here to do public good. Communities are our code, big point. But one of the things we try and do is we try and support minority voices and build support rather than do rules. So, sometimes it's problematic. We've been talking about it today for the board, but we don't want to force decisions down people's throats. We want to hear their points. We want to hear why they're saying the things they say, and see if they have the merit that is behind it to make that happen. So it's a very important thing about our communities. Additionally, we have some really crazy voting things, and you'll see this go into other points of our life. So +1 means you agree with something, 0 means you're like, I don't know if I agree or disagree with it. And -1 is, I strongly disagree with this. So we run a lot of things by lazy consensus, which kind of means like, hey, on Friday I'm going to do this unless anybody stands up and says they don't like this. Sometimes we have certain other windows and rules where we try and build consensus, but we don't necessarily have to have everybody agree. And there's a great website on our voting procedures on how we do this on our website. So you'll see people say like, it's kind of the equivalent of like, hey, should we go have pizza for dinner on Friday? You get a whole bunch of +1s, and then somebody will put a -1, and then conversation will start about why pizza sucks and why, for example, Chicago pizza is not pizza, it's casserole and whatnot. So these are very important debates. But additionally, meritocracy. Power is earned through merit, and I chose the word power on purpose because it is a way of amassing power. You do what you say you're going to do, and the JFDI principle is the just effing do it. So, Trevor, for example, was like, I want to throw an event in Chicago, and he just started doing it, and he led it. And if you lead by example, it's the way to get a lot of things done here and underneath our thing. And the people who have ideas and are willing to back those ideas up, those are the ones that earn the merit the fastest. And that's one of the things I'll talk about a little bit more when we get into the inclusion part, is how you can earn merit fastest, because that is the best way to become a part of the community and how to get over any hurdles that you have at the start of doing that. So documentation helps, all these other things, but there's other ways as well. But one of the key things is everybody at the ASF is individuals. Nobody represents a company. You don't have to mention where you work. It really isn't relevant. I don't even care. There are some times when I know, but other than that, we're all individuals. Your membership at the ASF is not through your corporation you work for. So if I go work for another company, my membership stays with me. It's not a part of my company, if you will. And as I mentioned before, we do have the bad part about meritocracy is they do turn into what are called beneficial dictators for life, which is that some people amass so much merit that they have to be careful that they don't squash every other person in their wake. They may do that very nicely, but it is sometimes a risk of it. All right, so transparency. Engineers sometimes go for a little bit too much transparency sometimes, but it works out generally in the end. So if it didn't happen on lists, so if it didn't happen in writing, it didn't happen. Everything's hopefully archived, and we use small baby steps so that things can be reversed. I'm not so big on that one, but that is part of our core. Sometimes I'm the one that pushes those a little bit farther along trying to get things. I don't know how I am on time, but I think we're bad. Is Mark here? Mark, are we bad on time?
No, we're good.
Okay. So when I talk about diversity, one of the people I bring up is my son. My son has autism, and when he was younger, we actually didn't know if he would ever speak. But there were 2 incidents. One where he stood up in his bed and he wore a Buzz Lightyear costume for about 3 years straight. In fact, we had to keep buying new ones for him. But he stood up in his bed and he went ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da, and I realized he was doing To Infinity and Beyond, literally just by the cadence. And that was one of the first clues that we had. But another one was we were walking by a veterinarian, and he basically walked up to a wall and started going a coo, and we realized he was doing Blue's Clues, which was this TV show where they had to find clues in the thing. So, one of the things I try and look for is with new people, what is the clue they need to get started? What do they need to get involved with the community? Because all programmers, unfortunately, we suck at documentation. RTFM is probably a bumper sticker I'd be happy to put on my car. If you don't know what it means, just ask later. But the point being is people need clues to get started. So think about what the clues are you need for your community. But anyway, back to the Apache Way. So It's a very pragmatic license. It's built to try and make visible and reusable code, so you're not always reinventing the wheel. You can cross-pollinate from different projects, bring them together, and keep making things bigger and better. Additionally, it helps with risk mitigation. So if you're worried about things like patents and licenses and companies coming after you to sue you, that's part of what we build into our whole thing. And what companies like, the number one thing I heard when I was the VP of fundraising, is they control their destiny. There's never an end of life with a product. So if they like a product, they use it, they build a business around it, they can keep extending it and doing things with it. They don't have to worry about that project going away or that company getting bought or changing the way they do things. Additionally, there's no copyleft principle. This is sometimes really important when you want to get people involved in your project, because you're not only involving people, sometimes you're involving companies. So if you want to go to your boss and say, hey, I want us to use this product, copyleft, what that means is that basically if you change the code and you distribute it, you have to distribute the source code. I won't really get into it much more than that, but that can be a big, big hurdle. That can make a lot of companies really, really nervous. So I a lot of times tell people, if you're trying to get a corporation involved, think about looking at things that are only Apache software licensed. It's very pro-business, and then you can start looking at other things. Or if you're making your own software, start with ASF. You can always go from ASF to GPL. That's probably the most popular license that can do public license. Very, very, very difficult to go the other way around. So something to think about. This is actually a quote from 2017 from a startup. And the startup hopefully right now will be in the business of being acquired. And this was a quote about GPL, which largely says if we ever got acquired, the use of GPL software would be a massive nightmare. And I won't talk about it, but it is a big thing. So if you're thinking about it, there's reasons Apache's out there. It's a great way to get companies involved and get your companies using open source software, because we're also vendor neutral. One thing this is a quote from me, basically, we're not about quid pro quo. Use our software, start $1 billion company. We don't care. That's what we exist for. The public good includes corporations and people. So I'm very anti things that are called the Commons Clause. This is about limitations on software that you can't use it for certain, at which point I don't believe it's open source. So I don't even call it an open source license anymore. It's just a business license at that point. But we don't have that. We are vendor neutral, and we don't put those kind of limitations on what you can do with the software. All right, so my final part, this is really about more the inclusion part, how to get people included. So I'm very big on this. Our inclusion and merit is not earned, has no basis on age, sex, religion, socioeconomic status, country of origin, ethnicity, etc. This is very big to me, and when you're online, one of the great benefits of being online is you're in that community, you're working on diversity being fixed by inclusion. Let people come in. I don't know, I don't care where they work, I don't care where they live, I don't care how much money they make, I don't care if they're male or female. I care if they can program, or if they can write docs, or if they can make code, or make graphics. So, focus on what they can do and what they can contribute to the community. If they can do it, don't pay attention to the other things. Include those people. That will fix your diversity issue just by having those people start to get included. Additionally, when you're dealing with something called applied behavioral analysis, what it basically, it's a lot of things about how to train very specific things. It's used with helping children. But a key point of it is you don't encourage any behavior that you don't want to see repeated. I'm sorry, that's a horrible way to put that. Don't encourage behaviors you don't want repeated. So, and the bottom problem is that there's negative and positive reinforcement, all these kind of things. But what this boils down to on the internet really is a phrase that was invented before really I started using the internet. Back in the BBS days, Tim Freeman actually called "Do Not Feed the Energy Creature," DNFTEC. If you get a person who's trolling, just don't respond to it. It's the best way to do it. Just don't give it any energy. And I mention this because I know people who are energy creatures, and one of them that I like bringing up, he literally would go on to the equivalent of a Christian bulletin board or Christian mailing list write a note that says, there is no God, log off, never to log on ever again. Knowing that there will be 50,000 emails written back to that post that he writes. He is solely an energy creature, sucking the energy out of things. And then these are, the more common term sometimes these days is trolls, etc. But, you have to think about what energy creatures need to survive, and if you can get it away from them, it will help. So my clicker is not working there. So I love this Venn diagram. I use this a lot in my speeches. What I look for is the common ground. For example, when I was the VP of fundraising, there's overlap between C corporations, charities, trade organizations, things like that. But where is the overlap in this person's skill? Where is what will help you in your project? Everybody's skills aren't going to overlap 100%, or you'd all be the same. So think about the diversity. Think about what they can bring to it, what overlaps with your project that you need, and focus on that, not on having everybody be identical. I won't talk about this one too much long because I know I'm going over time. But I love this talking across languages trick. This works really well, and as I've grown and worked more in the industry, I'm working a lot more internationally. So if you go to translate.google.com, you can basically take something that you write, put it in one language, and then put it in other languages and translate it 4 to 5 times, and then put it back into English. If you can't understand it once you've done that, you didn't write it simply enough. It's a great trick for writing things, especially where you're not sure if what you're writing is going to be understood well, or if it's going to translate across barriers, or if you use too many idioms and things like that. So I don't think you can really see the definition or the demonstration there, but basically you go from one language to the next, to the next, to the next, and then back. Really great way to see what's going on. Additionally, as I said before, sometimes I look for ways to help people overcome the hurdles with meritocracy and breaking into what they're doing. I sometimes recommend people use gender-neutral nicknames, things like Sam versus Samantha. I've got some funny stories about that with my sister-in-law, whose name is Sam, but it worked very well for her. There's pros and cons with it. I'm not trying to tell everybody here not to be themselves, but it sometimes can kind of get rid of things. I know another one named Sharon Faulkner. I use an alias at the ASF, other than your contractual document that you sign, your ICLA, which Matt here would be the only person really who would bother looking at it. You don't have to use your real name. If you don't want to have the grief, just use a different name. It can really help sometimes. Like I said, it's just to get over hurdles, earn a little merit, and then for the most part, you'll find the community is very welcoming. But my goal is to make it so that you can get past those original things. Additionally, there's some great things you can talk about with cultural pitfalls. So depending on where you're located, where your organizations, you can talk to things called cultural friendlies, talk to people who are willing to be blunt, that are from that particular community. Additionally, there's this great website here. There used to be a thing called Cultural Compass, but it unfortunately has largely disappeared or gone away. Do you know that Merle is gone now, the Cultural Compass app? Yeah, I think it might have gone commercial is what happened to it. But anyway, there's ways out there to try and make sure you're taking care of culture. But because communication is such a big part of what we do. These are 4 examples that actually happened at the ASF from verbiage that I like to bring up. So tabling items. In the US, apparently we're one of the few countries that if you have like a board meeting and you table something, and how many people here are from the US? Any Europeans here? Okay, so for the European, what does a tabling an item mean to you?
You're so long. I think it means get rid of it.
Yeah, so here it means get rid of it, or you're moving it to the next time. In a lot of European cultures, it means to bring it up for a vote. So they're like 180 degrees to opposite. So to table it means to put it on the table and vote on it in a lot of European parliamentary terms. But in the US, tabling it means we're not dealing with that this month, we're going to deal with that next month. That can be a real source of interesting arguments. We actually saw that a very interesting argument going back where people were just ships in the night, not knowing what each was saying. They were talking about 2 different things. A whip vote doesn't mean a lot to people who don't know what a parliamentary whip is. If you're interested, go look up on Wikipedia, but it has to do with kind of a couple of things, but it's usually about getting kind of a straw vote about what's something going to happen. Is it going to pass or not? And in more parliamentary organizations, it's about trying to get things passed from one party or another so they whip their own party into shape, I think is where it kind of comes from. The third one actually was very interesting. We had 2 out of 9 board members about a year and a half ago that did not know what an endowment was. I didn't know that. It was I'm writing all this documentation about endowments and how they'll work, and never thought to say what an endowment is. It's a way of storing money and funding an organization usually off the interest only from investing that money. And then finally, that one's actually just more of a, what is a Berliner? That's a famous one in the US. It's a donut to some people, and it's a person from Berlin if you pronounce it correctly, I guess. But anyway, final notes. Tomorrow there will be hopefully a discussion, or at least a vote about a diversity and inclusion initiative. It's been a lot of work. Briz and Earl are here and worked really, really hard on it. I don't know if anybody will be here, but you're welcome to come and be a guest at the meeting. You don't usually get to talk, but I also thought these 2 particular notes that came, I somehow lost the source for them, that they were there, were really, really good for talking about different diversity, and this particular organization, the Open Source Diversity, they're gathering different resources about how to make this work and what's successful and what's not. So anyway, that's all I have. I hope some of that helps with some of the things where you're getting people involved in communities, or you want to get involved in communities, some tricks you can use to get over those hurdles and why those hurdles exist and things like that. Because, like, for example, I won't make an apology for the fact that we are a meritocracy. I do think you have to do your homework. You have to put in some time and some energy and come up to speed on what's going on. I don't think you need to go read the entire document or the entire code rather than the documentation. But I do want to see you write a well-researched thing. What I don't want to see is somebody go, well, you're from India and a girl, therefore you shouldn't be allowed to ask the question. That's asset. So, hey, any questions? Well, thank you all so much.